I'm a Holocaust survivor. I'm a survivor. I lucked out. I survived the worst possible thing that human beings can do to other human beings. In 1938, my father was tied to a lamppost and beaten almost to death because the Nazis wanted him to leave his wife and his 3 daughters because we were Jewish. He was not Jewish. In 1943, after all of my mother's Jewish family and mine were murdered already, we lived for those 2 years as hounded and hunted human beings. The Allies, the Brits and the Americans, bombed the city of Hamburg. Because we were Jewish, we were not allowed to go into bomb shelters, so we were made to go from a pit in the street to a doorway wherever we could find some shelter. And because the neighborhood where we lived was one of the ones that was most heavily bombed, we were assumed to be among those crisp, burned bodies, and we were able to go into hiding. I know what it is like to be hungry. I know what it is like to experience war and bombs and fires. I know what it is like to be discriminated against. I know what it is like to be persecuted. I know what it is like to see relatives get murdered. I know this. I experience this. It's in my DNA. Therefore, my connection to people who are suffering is practically automatic. Washington in 1960 was the shock of my life. Washington was the most racist place I had experienced coming to America. This was 8 years after I had come to America. It resembled in its racism what I had experienced post-war as a Jew in Germany. The racism was so pervasive, it crossed all lines: housing, jobs, school. We became very quickly active in the civil rights movement in DC. We joined CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. This led to other things. In 1963, I volunteered to work on the march. I licked envelopes, I made telephone calls, I went to places to talk to people. I organized people who would be marshals, people who would do any number of things. On the day of the march, I was in the information tent where we were all day and all night. The buses were arriving, one bus after the other, disgorging just tons of people, and all of them black. And the men were in overalls, and the women had hats on and gloves and were dressed up. And it was so amazing. It was so liberating. They went to Atlantic City to fight for seats. They did not win it. Our part was to have a sit-in for 4 days and 4 nights on the boardwalk. I had organized it for Washington, Maryland, and Virginia, and I had to make telephone calls. I had to organize it. This was the Freedom Summer. Was, of course, all through the summer of 1964, where students had gone to Mississippi for voter registration drives. There was no way that I could not go to Mississippi and fight. There was just no way. There was also no way for me to say, oh, well, that's America's problem. That's not my problem. I've had my problem. This is my problem, because at one point in my life, I'm going to have to look at somebody and say to them, in 1960, oh, I read books and I painted pretty pictures and I went to the opera. civil rights movement? No, that wasn't right. No, so it was just no, it was no contest. I was as a SNCC volunteer that I was in Mississippi. I handled the voter registration, which meant I would go around and knock on people's doors and ask them to register to vote, and I then became a freedom school teacher. I ran the school for all the time I was in Mississippi, from very quickly after I got there. At one point I came one morning to the school and a cross had been burned during the night in front of the school by the Ku Klux Klan. I doused the cross, and when it was dry and when it was no longer hot, I wrote freedom on the crossbar of this cross, and I put it out every day as the opposite. Theirs was a sign of aggression and hate, and I put it out as a sign of the opposite, hope and love. I'm an advocate for peace. I think that our problems are so enormous and so widespread, they are not just a city or a community, they are global. My father, who was a non-Jew in Belgium, risked his life to help Belgian Jews. He was not Belgian and he was not Jewish. Practically every evening meal was accompanied by lectures from him about what my duty as a human being was. And my duty as a human being was to stand up and speak out when I saw people being mistreated, when I saw discrimination, when I saw people being beaten, when I saw people hungry. I believed him. I really truly believed that this is why I'm a human being. And if you're a human being, that means that you're responsible for other human beings.